Welcome to the Ralph Moore Podcast. Gain a leadership advantage as Ralph pulls wisdom from his bag of over 50 years experience in planting and leading multiplying churches. Our goal is to help you live as a leader you'd want to follow. You'll learn about making disciples and planting churches, but beyond that, you'll gain practical wisdom about subjects like how to manage your team, handling difficult people, pulling a congregation off a growth plateau, and even money management.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm spending time with another new friend I met at Exponential. His name is Ed Kang, and he leads a thing called Grace Point Ministries in what I'm going to call the People's Republic of Berkeley, California, one of the hardest places in the world to do ministry. And yet these guys have got a ministry among college students that is not only thriving, it's multiplying, it's growing. It looks like a microchurch movement. I'm excited to hear their story. So Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ralph. It's an honor.
So Ed, we want to get into the nuts and bolts of the ministry. And so I'd like to have you just give me the kind of the elevator speech, the 30-second overview. And then I'd like you to kind of, if you could go into your personal experience. How did you come to Christ? How did you feel called to do this? What's been your work experience, your schooling experience, those kinds of things that have added up to the person that you are today. And then later on, we'll talk about the nuts and bolts of the ministry.
The overview of our church is that we're a collegiate church planting network, and we're right now in 38 cities. And we have an outreach to about 70 some campuses. I grew up in LA in the 70s and was on my way to petty crime and delinquency. Actually grew up kind of poor, struggling immigrant family. My dad was an alcoholic. Only later did I realize, that's what he was. Never could hold down a job because he was a proud businessman from Korea and couldn't really adjust to America. He would tell me, I became deaf and mute, all for you. So you need to succeed. Typical immigrant overloading of expectations on the one son. So I was the only son, and he became deaf and mute, meaning he can't understand English and he can't speak English. So that's what he meant by that. So I was an angry kid and was starting down this path of juvenile delinquency, and then I became. Then there was this cool postman who worked the graveyard shift, and during the day gathered together a bunch of youth just on his own. And we had a little Bible study there on Saturdays, and he had a guitar, which was radical back then, and taught us praise songs. And so I became Christian in 79, and just immediately became an evangelist on my campus and started a Bible study. Then I went to Berkeley, and it was going to be like pre-med, go to med school, like every other good Korean immigrant kid. And back then coding wasn't a thing. So, and then I decided I like writing. So, and reading and talking. So I went to law school instead. So I went to Berkeley Law. I practiced law at a San Francisco, big corporate firm, practiced a little bit out in Boston as well. And then at the age of 30, it dawned on me that, and during that time I was engaged in college ministry, first evangelizing my peers and then the younger classmen, and was part of this collegiate church about a mile away from campus. And then there came a point where I said, if I left this desk, like some other aspiring lawyer can represent Bechtel just as well. But the guys that I'm pouring into, who, as crazy as it seemed to me then, just soaking up everything I was saying and wanted to be just like me. And I looked at the scene, and it's like, no, people aren't entering into ministry because they can't afford to. Well, I could afford to. My wife was a computer programmer for Sun Microsystems back then. And so just gave up the job and entered into a full-time ministry and started leading since 93. And we didn't start planting churches until 2007. So there was this long incubation period where we were understanding what the church was supposed to be. And then one day it dawned on us, wait, we should duplicate this in other college towns. And so we wanted to, we're just loving life. We're just, and college students are happy. except for finals, and I think college students are happy because it's artificially limited. You just live in close proximity. The different social class is all muted because you can be really rich. You're not going to there's only so much you can put into your dorm room, and everybody's on mission, except in this case, it's to pass classes, right? And that created a template for Acts2 life. And I remember deliberately saying to one another and to the younger guys, wait a minute, let's not scatter, because the world would tear us away to supposedly better things. Like, you're always supposed to be moving on to LA or to New York. Let's not do that. And let's not keep increasing our standard of living because we make more money, because that's what splits people. Different standards of living become then barriers, and you can't hang out anymore, and people go out to the suburbs. And back then, I think it was John Howard Yoder, Rich Christians in a Poor World, something like that. And then the Foster book, Discipline, Celebration of Discipline, the Simplicity chapter rocked us. And we were already living simple lives as college students and new grads, as single guys, just continuing to live like college students right after college. We said, wait a minute, this is good enough. Let's keep it like this. And then we said, wait, we without being all that spiritually mature, we're sort of living Acts 2, and so let's duplicate this. And, that took a while for us to realize. And then starting from 2007, we just started planting churches in college towns everywhere.
And I'm really, really it's just enthralled with hearing this story. And I'm wondering how come I haven't heard it before. But I want you to take me back to that guy with the guitar, the postman, because I would look at that. My definition of a church is 2 or 3 people gathering in Jesus' name. But I think that the characteristics are it's really Acts 2. There's teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, prayer, praise, people sharing with each other. And, a lot of people will get all off on, you got to be large enough to have a board of elders, that kind of stuff. It's like, don't give me that. But my wife came from something like this in LA. She lived in Echo Park, which now is a multi-million-dollar neighborhood. In those days was a ghetto. Really frightening place to grow up as a little kid. But they had the public schools in America used to have a thing called Christian release time, something like that. You'd get out of school an hour early one day a week. And there was this lady, she still remembers her name, and that's all, who would give them candy at the end of a meeting and do a little bit of a Bible deal. And, her parents were deaf mutes, both of them. They were attending a church, but she's not deaf, so she didn't quite fit. But this lady brought her to maturity in Christ as a child. She moved away from there when she was in the 6th grade. So all of this happened in elementary school. Kind of unpack that a little bit. Tell some, you got to have some good memories about this man. And the reason I'm asking this is that there are people in our churches who, we look at the APES gifts in Ephesians 4. I'm hearing the word evangelist just come through. I am not. I'm the guy who sits on an airplane and won't talk to anybody. The guys in my church that are always, I led this person to Christ in a 3-hour flight. I so wish I could do that. But I see people, and I think that we're kind of missing the boat, because one of my hobby horses is that they would call me the pastor. Well, that negates all the other people who have a pastoral gift in our church. And I'm kind of on a flyer of, we need to recognize these gifts, and sometimes it's vocabulary that stands in our way. If I'm the pastor, then you're not a pastor. And in our small group ministry that we had, what I would call micro church inside the church, we tried to call those guys pastors. And about half of them said, no, I'm a leader, I'm not a pastor. So I think we need to rearrange our thinking a little bit and see people like this lady that influenced my wife, or this man that influenced you. I would see him as a pastor evangelist, something like that. Talk to us about that. Just, help get guys that are listening to this to go, we got guys in our church, if I'd support them, they could do these things.
Gosh, man, I can go on and on about that. What happened was he and a couple of his friends did this thing. And then they brought us all together at a retreat at Big Bear Mountain at this cabin that we squeezed into. 30 of us there. I think most of them sort of like me, kind of lost. And the retreat was so powerful that they decided to start a weekly Bible study, which was kind of crazy how they approached it. We had Friday night prayer at night at Santa Monica Beach under and shouting at the waves, and then we had Bible study on Saturdays and Sundays. And the diehards went to all three. And that was me. I needed something that intense as a youth. And then these guys got so amazed at what God was doing through them that they did the next logical thing, which is to go to seminary. And then once they became seminarians, they did the next logical thing, which is to apply for positions at churches. And then they were driving the van and serving all the logistical and janitorial and chair setup needs of the church. And the whole group sort of dissolved. By that time, I was well into college. So it was really sad for me looking. So I was fortunate to be in the most intense phase of that. But because of their fruit, they thought, well, then we all should go to seminary and do this full time, except seminary led them to church, and church took them away from ministry. So that was really crazy making for me to look at that. I today, where we are on this is we don't use the term pastor very much. I'm still Pastor Ed. That's like my name now. But all of the guys that are sent out, and you know what? The fact is, your typical college student doesn't care. We really try to reach unchurched people. So of course they don't know the terminology, but they don't know that. They don't care if you're the pastor or the bishop or the preacher. They're not hung up on whether you went to seminary. And the vast majority of our guys who are leading teams, I think a majority of them are bivocational. So they have day jobs and they have pretty good careers. And then they just lead and they create community, and they are, community creators more than anything else. And then some of our guys are full-time, and we haven't ordained hardly any of them. So and then the parents will come who are, from a traditional church, and they just call them pastor and they don't argue. And like, who's the pastor here? They go, I am. But that's not the terminology that we use. And I'm really fortunate to be part of, the Southern Baptist denomination that doesn't require all of these credentialing things in order for you to lead and preach. So, and then some of our groups are not even leader led. It's a cohort of a handful of young couples who just sort of lead together. There's not a single leader there.
I love that. I think internally we need to recognize gifts. And so I really, we kind of built everything that we ever did off of 3 passages of scripture: Acts 2, Ephesians 2, and Ephesians 4. So you're God's masterpiece. He's created you to good works. Now go out there and do them. Not in here. This is just, we would actually say this isn't a church on Sunday. This is a convention of small churches. And you'll know if you're a member or not if you're in one. One Sunday I stood up and then I started using it. It was just a joke when I said it, but I go, I just want to make a really solemn promise to you. And I got a real serious face on. I go, if you're sick, you're injured, you're in the hospital for any reason, I promise you, I will not be there. I won't come to see you because I'm not your pastor. I'm and we were in Hawaii, so I'm the big kahuna. And but your pastor is the pastor of, at the time we were calling the mini church. And if he's doing his job, he won't come either, because his job is to equip the saints to do the work of ministry. They'll be there. And we actually saw it played out one time. I actually did go to a hospital because one of my really close friends was there and I couldn't get in the room. The door wouldn't open. I got this little nurse and she jammed the door open. There are people leaning against the door. Their whole mini church was inside the room. But what I'm seeing and I'm hearing from others is kind of echoing what you're saying. We're not using this terminology. But what I believe is that internally we need to be saying, you are an evangelist. So do this, and you got my support. You have an apostolic bent to your life, and you got my support. But out there, I mean, the people who run out and call themselves apostle, I've actually seen people put it on their business card. It's like, are you crazy or what? And when I was in California, my name was Ralph. People would want to call me. In those days, they called you Reverend. It's like, oh, so I got
a revered one.
Yeah, and I got set free from that. And here's how. I had it on my business card. I was so proud of that. I was 22 years old, graduated from a Bible college, and the pastor bought me these business cards. Said Reverend Ralph Moore. And shortly after that, it wasn't but maybe 2 or 3 months. It was a Sunday night. We had Sunday night church. I'm wearing a suit and tie. I'm a youth pastor wearing a suit and tie. It's silly. And I forgot my Bible. And so I go back in the church, get my Bible, and we had left the parking lot. My car was parked in the street. My wife was there. And I come out, and there's these bushes about 2.5 feet tall. I'm flying over the top of the bushes with my suit flapping in the wind. And one of the kids in the group goes, Reverend Ralph. And it was like, I put away the cards. And in that church, they still called me that. But I was chafing. So then afterwards, my mantra would be, just call me Ralph. It'll work for my mom. It'll work for you. And then when I got to Hawaii, the culture is different. And they kind of needed to do the Pastor Ralph thing. And so, I kind of went along with it. But I think if we're reaching non-believing people, we have to ditch those terms. But it seems to me that inside, we have to educate form and function. And this is the form that describes the function that God created you for. So this is really.
Yeah. And we found that we didn't have to fight to ditch the terms in that everybody considers themselves to be ministers. Yes. So we have this strange term that's not used outside of our church in quite this way very much, I noticed. But people say, yeah, I'm doing ministry, and yeah, in my ministry, and I took this job so I can do more ministry. So it's the word "do ministry" it just rolls off the tongue for everybody, and everybody understands what that means is to reach and to nurture and to love and disciple people in the context of a team. And so we have people that so everybody. So our terminology is staff. Because we come out of a collegiate setting. So that's one way to distinguish the crew, InterVarsity, they call them staffs, but our staff are all bivocational. And so the person who is full-time and leading the thing, the person who's leading the thing isn't necessarily full-time. So they're like doing exactly what everybody else is doing. So the idea that they are sort of set apart in some way just doesn't enter into people's minds. And I think one of the things that we really kind of are react against or rail against is the audience church, where you get everybody in to a big auditorium so that the person with incredible charisma and the ability to enthrall that crowd, man, like bless them. That's incredible gifting, and I don't want to take anything away from people who can do that. And I can do that somewhat. But there came a time when I realized, wait a minute, the more I exercise this gifting of mine, the more I'm turning everybody passive. And for me, what I wanted to do was, hey, at your age, I was doing this. So why should you be under me? You should be doing this, and you should be scared, and you should be crying out to God. And so church planting came out of two different motivations. And for me, I think this latter motivation was stronger. The first motivation is, we need to duplicate this. We need to reach college students because it's a group that's overlooked, and the parachurch approach wasn't something that was complete. I thought a local church reaching college students would be the ideal, and you raise them and you continue to raise them as kingdom workers. But the other thing was, my heart toward the people I'm raising up is, at a certain point, just the structure of the thing. It's not that my character and whatever is a ceiling to whoever under me. That's true. But what else is true is structurally, if you are not leading out and making decisions and reaching people in an autonomous way, then you get passive. And I just didn't like. I wanted the people I'm raising to have the same experience that I was having, which means I need to get out of the way, and then they need to lead. And there was only so much of me getting out of the way and them leading that was possible within one church setting, one locale. And so the church planting, like you go and you duplicate, you recapitulate our history here out there, but then we stay connected so that, we can continue to develop them. And so for me, it was sort of church planting was the next step in my understanding of discipleship of the guys I was raising.
So the question that would come to my mind is, are they planting churches? Have you moved into that next step after that? After beginning to be a planting sort of network, I think it kind of moves toward a multiplication movement. And, terminology is still a little goofy to me, but.
Yeah, we looked at that, and it's we're not as fast as some really multiplying groups are. It looks to me like it takes about 7 to 8 years, because you need to go through the first cycle of 4 classes. Because when we land on a campus, we reach the freshmen, and then after it's the senior year. Some of them will stay, and then more of them will stay, and then we have indigenous, leaders who are then pouring back into the college ministry there. And then once that flywheel gets going, then you're a little bit overstaffed. Then we're feeling like, okay, it's time for a chunk of you to go, and that takes some time. Except when there's a campus right nearby. So our UNC group. Our North Carolina Chapel Hill group, I think it was their 4th year, and they hived off a group to NC State, which is in Raleigh, and they're in Chapel Hill. And but our older churches like Austin has sent out a number of groups. Our Davis Church sent out a number of groups. Still, Berkeley is sending out the lion's share because we're sort of the mothership and the largest. But now we're at a cycle where from the church plants, people are going out.
That's exciting. That is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation around here is like, okay, when's it my turn? When's my chance to go out and plant a church? And we want to get a critical mass of teams that already kind of work together, and then for them to go off to a new city and duplicate the thing. And there's a pent-up demand almost. So this past, 2021, in the middle of pandemic, I think people got stirred crazy. And as I look back on it, it's a little crazy still. But we sent out 400 people to 15 cities in 2021 during the summer, and started on all these campuses, this past fall. And I think we have hundreds of them that were at the winter retreats this past January and February.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe and check his blog at ralphmoore.net.